Welcome to On the Horn with Charley Armey. I'm your host, Gary Emineth. This is series number 3 in a group of interviews that we're going to be doing with Charley, talking a lot about NFL football and his career as a scout, having coached, and also general manager of the St. Louis Rams. We'll probably be getting to the Rams maybe as early as next week. This week, we're going to focus on salary cap. It's complicated, and I did some research before trying to do this interview, and I decided, I'm just going to throw it in the garbage and let Charley explain it to me because it gets a little complicated for a guy like me. Charley, welcome to On the Horn.
Welcome. I'm glad to be here this morning. So we'll see how everything goes. I guess it's morning yet for me.
Yeah.
It's early for you.
Yeah. So we only got a 1 hour time difference from North Dakota down to Arizona since you guys just keep that steady clock always the same. So that's good. So you didn't have to worry about getting that extra hour of sleep and all that kind of thing that some of us up here had to do with. So.
It works for me because I'm not very big on change. I like that things don't change. The better they stay more, it's cool, the better it is for me.
I'm the opposite. If I can change something, I'm going to work on it immediately. And I'm always in constant motion of some sort in my head. So today's going to be an interesting way to try to drill down on how the NFL ended up with salary caps and all those kind of things. So, Charley, give us a little bit of some background. The NFL season's full blower. We're halfway through the season. There's a lot of interest in what's going on. How are the teams doing at this mid-season point? But when it comes down to the way spending is done in salaries, give us a background on how we got here on salary caps and why that makes a difference in today's NFL.
You have to go back. The salary cap was born out of the negotiation between the Players Association and the owners of the NFL clubs. And you have to go back and see what was happening. There was a big discrepancy, and the Players Association was looking for a better way to capture a percentage of the revenue to split with the players. And this all became a big problem. People were looking to try to discuss different ways of doing it, and coming out of the negotiation, they decided a certain percentage, 63%, of the ticket sales would be split equally among the players. But now they had to figure out a formula how to do that. So this is really how the salary cap came into being and how it was born. I could tell you the early years of the salary cap were very interesting because discipline was not was a little bit loose during those early years, and we're trying to filter out all the different ways that people could figure out how to work around the salary cap and so on. In the early years, the 49ers and the Cowboys both had unique ways to work around the salary cap, which we can talk about at some point. But now this became even more of a problem. So developing the salary cap, the reason for the salary cap, and how it evolved over the years is a very interesting story.
So I guess from what I understand, the purpose was if you have a Los Angeles team or a New York team, they have bigger revenues, all these bigger ticket sales, higher prices, so it drives the numbers up. And what happens is those teams have more money to pay better players when they trade them and keep them from going free agent or whatever, I would assume. So this was really to set a number that everybody had to operate under. So whether you're in Kansas City or Los Angeles, it's a kind of an even game. Is that really part of the point?
That was the whole idea, was to make it an even field, give everybody an opportunity with the same resources to develop the football program and to pay their players. And the complications of doing that are quite involved. But if it was the whole idea was the playing field would be level, so everybody would have the same opportunity. There were teams that were, like you said, the high-income teams, the Cowboys, the 49ers, some of the teams, and New York, some of the teams that were on the upper end of the stroke with the salary cap before it was in existence. They always had an advantage, and then, of course, salary cap come along with the idea, give everybody the same advantage and the same opportunity to win in the National Football League.
So what is that salary cap today? That's a number. Give us the history when you started, when it came in, and assuming that is the total salary that could be paid to all players during that specific season. Is that what that means?
Yeah, just say, for example, our salary cap the first year, say it was $164 million. Let's just use that thing. That means that the money we could use that year on our salary cap, and got to remember now how you structure the salary cap is very important. And I have to get into that so people can see how it becomes a lot more complicated. The guys that are making this tremendous amount of salary, like quarterbacks, for example, and they would eat up some most of your salary cap. So you have to be careful how you structure the contract with a player like that, so he doesn't eat up your salary cap. But let's just say we start with $164 million, and now we have to figure out how we're going to divide that $164 million. We already know if you have a great quarterback, he's going to take a big chunk of your salary cap. And then we have to set up a formula for where we know we're going to go with the salary cap. First of all, we're going to decide what's important for building our football team. We know the quarterback's number one. He's probably going to get a great check. But we have to have, number two, we have to have a left tackle. Number three, we have to have a speed rush defensive end. Number four, we need to have a speed rush upfield wide receiver, and so on and so forth. So they break down in the priority how you're building your football team. Oddly, what people wouldn't realize, one of the guys who fits into the upper echelon of it is the center. It's really hard or difficult to operate without a proper center in the National Football League. So he's going to eat up, because of his value, he's going to eat up a large chunk of your salary cap. So you have to divide and decide. We always had a system. The wide receiver, X number of dollars goes wide receivers. X number of dollars go into our offensive linemen. The left tackle getting the majority if your quarterback is right-handed. If your quarterback is left-handed, then it's the right tackle that's the most important, and so on and so forth. But anyway, building a football and structuring a football team and spending your money wisely is very important. Now, the other problem you have when you're building a salary cap is every year as you see on every Sunday, there's an injury. Somebody has to replace that injury. Let's just say you got a $5 million right guard. You're paying him $5 million this year inside the cap. And he gets out, he gets injured, and he's out for the season. That doesn't relieve you from his cap responsibility. You still have to pay him. But now you're going to have to go out and find somebody else to plug into that gap and pay him. So inside our salary cap, we always had what we called an emergency or entry fund. We've held back a percentage of their salary cap, so we didn't get caught unable to replace a player that got injured. And of course, the salary cap eats up players, so like a big monster. So you're always got to have a certain number of players on your football team that are operating under the lower end of the salary cap. And I'll get into that when we talk about the cap within the cap, which is an interesting philosophy as well.
But Charlie, when this came into, what year was that the salary cap came in? Do you know?
Yeah, I can't remember now, but it's been around, but it's distracted my memory now. But it's been around for a long time now. But I'll tell you what really brought it in. If you go back to when the 49ers were a great football team, the early days of the salary cap, and this is what got the owners thinking we got to level the field, because they had such great players. They were able to pay all these great players and able to, in order to take that dominance away. And I imagine that this was probably back somewhere in the early 80s when it started becoming a problem. And I can't remember the exact dates that have been, but the structure of it, I remember very clearly, and how it came about. And I need to get into how people figured out how to abuse the salary cap. That's an interesting story in itself.
Well, I would guess that there's having great players and figuring out how to do it and having the right coaches. You have to leverage. It's a business. The value of these NFL teams are not worth hundreds of millions anymore. It's the billion number. And what I think is fascinating, Charlie, when you think about these are billionaires that own these teams and families that are maybe generational. They're used to doing what they want to do. And all of a sudden they got to come together and be told, hey, we're going to change the way this is done. I think of George Steinbrenner to Yankees. For years, they just spent whatever they needed to win the World Series. And so this really had to be some pushback from the owners related to this, or were they happy to go along so they could control their margins and profitability?
A lot of it was the fact that it was the majority of the owners, which is just a handful that had the advantage with their club's revenue and so on and so forth. So one thing that's really great about, we have a strong commissioner, and the commissioner's bylaws and rules, the owners pretty much are wired into. The only way they can be changed if the majority of the owners vote to change it. So what happens then, it's like a democracy. Everybody votes for the salary cap and the guidelines for the salary cap. And the richest owners, along with the poorest owners, all have to go along with what is constructed in that framework. And then, of course, the commissioner, he has to be the referee, you might say, and make sure that it's administered properly. So it's an interesting phenomenon. But the owners are pretty good about, within their fraternity, trying to make sure they have the best product possible for the public, because they all know there is no football without the people, without the fans, without the television revenue, and so on and so forth. How you split up the revenue and so on it becomes even more and more important each year because the revenue keeps growing. I remember when the Denver Broncos sold for $25 million. I remember when San Diego franchise came in for $25,000. So you can see how this thing has grown and the problems that it creates as it continues to balloon out, and how you got to be careful that it doesn't rupture and upset the balance of the National Football League. So one team or several teams start having the advantage and you start losing interest over a long period of time, or with the total program, and the total program, of course, is a 32 teams.
We've been talking salary cap. Charley, who's been a coach and general manager and scout in the NFL. So, Charley, we're going to bring up the chart for when the salary cap got started and what it's grown from. So from 1994, it looks like we were down to $30 million, and how it's grown to $280-some million over the course from 94. So we're looking at 30 years in the NFL that they've had the salary cap and how it's exploded. And you're saying that salary cap is all tied to the revenues generated that gets then dispersed back to the players. And so every year it's just going up and up. And I assume that's related to ticket prices, what the television revenues are, and just all general top-line revenue that gets calculated back in. Is that kind of the effect of it?
That's the effectiveness stuff. The percentage has to go off your ticket revenues and so on and so forth. The players, if you look around the National Football League, you see all these fancy new stadiums with all these fancy new boxes that are up there around the top of the stadium. That's revenue that doesn't have to be shared with the players. So that's that's another thing that was born out of this. If you remember the old stadiums when the salary cap first came in, didn't have a lot of these luxury boxes and everything. But if you could sell a luxury box, let's say to AT&T for $300,000, they still have to buy the tickets for the luxury box. But the money that you got from the sale of the luxury box or the rent of the luxury box, however you want to put it, doesn't have to be shared. But if they say the luxury box can hold 20 seats, you have to pay for the 20 tickets to fill that luxury box. So there's a very complicated system here. But the salary cap when it first came in was interesting. I don't know how many of our listeners have heard of the Madden games. And,
oh, yeah. I'm sure many of them have. My son sure played a lot of it, and that was a big one. So talk to us about that.
That's how it was born out of the salary cap, because how that happened was what was designed by it. If you were involved in the Madden game, say as a player, say as the quarterback for the Madden game, you would receive a salary. And today you still do, but that didn't have to be counted in the salary cap. So now the owners had to get together and figure out how the people are working around the edges of the salary cap, bringing in additional revenue for players so they could get this additional revenue and supplement their salary cap. So that became another problem the owners had to get together and hash out. But for years, people were using and paying their players out of these type of programs, and that so they had to close that loophole, and that was quite an interesting thing because, of course, the teams with the most money were the ones that had figured out how to do that. And of course, the Cincinnati's, the people that played by the rules, they didn't have the revenue and they couldn't do that. So then they had to level that field. So that became a problem for the salary cap, but that has all been handled now. But the owners have a very difficult time every time. It's just like any other thing that happens. If there's always something that comes along and pokes the bear and finds another way to supplement the income and so on and so forth. But very interesting. But money is so large now. It's so insane that the players, if you're a player in the National Football League that you're making a lot more money than the average person in the United States. And the other thing that born out of the salary cap is the contribution to the Players Association retirement fund. So that's all that part of the salary cap, how much money each club has to contribute each year to that player fund when the players are done playing. Say you're done when you've played. If you played 13 years, you become qualified for the benefits. And then, if, of course, as you play 15 years, your benefits go up. And I think they can start taking now those benefits at the age of 50. But all that money is coming out of the salary cap structure. The money goes into that player benefits. So it's quite complicated. There's quite a few different avenues you can look at and how the salary cap has helped the game tremendously. But it's just mind-boggling how you handle all those figures. Now, again, you got to go back and figure out, do not violate the salary cap. And that can put you in a lot of trouble down the line. I'll give you an example of the salary cap and how it works. A real simple example, one that people can relate to today. The quarterback that came out is the last pick in the draft for the 49ers. He's working. There's a cap called the rookie cap. It's a salary cap inside the salary cap. When a rookie comes in, and the reason they did the rookie salary cap is because the Players Association were complaining and were upset because if I was drafted as first pick in the draft, I could come in and make more money than somebody had been playing in the league for 8 or 9 years. And there was no restriction on how much money they paid me out of that salary cap. And I was eating up money that the Players Association felt should go to the veteran players that have proven themselves. So development of the salary cap within the salary cap or the rookie cap is a real interesting phenomenon. How that works is very interesting. But getting back to my point, this quarterback is now playing in the rookie salary cap within the cap. So that means all that money he does, they don't have to pay the franchise quarterback is money that's released into their cap for the next 3 or 4 years. It gives them a lot more money to go out and get better players. Now, there's a problem. When that player becomes a veteran player, after he exercises his option, he's going to accelerate big into that salary cap. I mean, in the $100 million into the salary cap. Now, all those players that you picked up on the fringe with the excess money because you were playing with a quarterback for the rookie salary cap, somebody is going to have to go. Somebody is going to have to be eliminated to bring you back into balance. So that's when you see teams, they say, why would they get rid of that player? He's such a good player. They didn't get rid of him by choice. They get rid of him by necessity because the salary cap is going to eat a player every year or two, every year on every team.
I saw that the rookie salary cap, when they do their salaries, from what I could tell, was a 4-year contract that they would get locked in on. And I saw one thing, and maybe you can help me understand if I'm accurate, but if you were in the first round or the top one, you could get up to $45 million or $48 million in a 4-year contract. And then if you were in the first round, you might be $15 million. You're in the first round, but you're at the bottom of the first round. And as you work your way in, the numbers got lower and lower. But you were locked into that 4-year contract. And I think the minimum number that a player would make in a year was about $840,000, some number like that. And
incredible.
And when you think about a guy that's sitting on the bench and he's making $840,000, he still gets beat up every week when he's practicing and getting ready through training camp. But to your point is those rookies in those first 4 years, that salary stays low, but all of a sudden you're one of them that, like a Brock Purdy, and all of a sudden you got very low end, and now you got to pay $150 million. And that's where it gets tricky when you're saying you have to get rid of some of those other higher priced players if you want to re-sign him.
That's correct. And then structuring a contract now becomes into point of view. These contracts aren't just a 1-year deal like you were talking about. The contract, say if you sign a contract for a rookie, let's just use round numbers. Say you sign a contract for a rookie for 4 years for $40 million. But anyway, you divide the salary cap up over 4 years. It's very important how you structure a cap. If you always see that they're talking about, we can sign this player if we can reconstruct Tom Brady's cap, or Tom Brady agrees to restructure his contract in order for us to sign this defensive end we're looking at. So you could sign the contract. Say you have a kid of $100 million over a 10-year contract. That has to be eaten up over that 10 years. The problem was, it's just, again, you have to overcome these problems in the salary cap. There's so many to talk about. But say I sign a player for $100 million on a 10-year contract, and we're in the year 7. So I still have a lot of money to pay this player, and I want to cut him. The only problem I got, if I cut this player, that's where your dead money is. That accelerates into that salary cap, and it's called dead money. It's dead money because it's no money that you can't use. It's money that you committed, and when you cut the player, so then what we devised another system for overcoming this kind of a problem. We devised a system for when we do our contracts, we would do an injury contract. It clause, and most of the contracts I did all had an injury clause. In other words, say I paid you $10 million and you got injured, and I have a clause in there saying, okay, if you get injured and it's a career-ending injury, I don't have to pay you the $10 million. We were negotiated in the contract when we initially signed it, so I only have to pay you $6 million. So we negotiated. In other words, you have to devise ways to make sure your salary cap is fluid and functional, and it's a very difficult balancing act to do. That's why all the teams have a guy that's in charge of nothing but the salary cap and how to balance it.
I think, Charlie, when I look at the idea of a player getting injured, I've always said over the years that maybe they ought to pay him on performance, which to some degree that's true. But when they have a star that has a number and then all of a sudden they get paid and then they don't carry through on it, that becomes a big. Carson Wentz is a guy that had a big contract and never really was able to deliver after the first few years. We come back from the break. I'm going to bring up the salary cap, a lookout, and which talks about his cap amount and dead money, and just have you explain what that all means. So, Charlie, we're going to bring up a chart on the screen that is on overthecap.com website, and it gives some columns. It lists the teams, so Patriots in the top, Cowboys, Commanders, and then it has the first column, cap space. And if we just look at the Patriots, it shows that they have a $50,622,178 salary cap. Then it says effective cap space, ranks them, cap spending, active cap spending, and dead money. So let's talk about what does cap space mean as we look at that chart.
That's the money you have available at any particular point, the money you have available for getting new players. The money you could go out and spend to get a left tackle, right guard, center, whatever. That's the money available within the salary cap of the original $250 million. The money you have available right now to go out and find players. That's the money that's available. And then you see the two are usually the same, effective and current. And then if you move across where you see the active cap space, that first figure is the amount of money you still have, the $219 million. Let's just use $50 million and $219 million. And over there on the right side, you see the dead money of $52 million. That's the money we've spent. That's no longer available. That money is gone. We spent the money and it got to be paid out, hopefully over a period of time. But generally, if it's a salary entry negotiation, it makes a big difference in that figure. But that money is gone. It's been spent.
So, Charlie, as an example, we're talking New England Patriots. Now, Tom Brady's no longer there, but they could have had a contract that paid out over 10 years and he only played for 4 or some hypothetical number. Contractually, you're saying is if he would have had to pay him for another, let's just say 5 years beyond him playing, whether it was injury or whatever caused him to retire, that money still gets paid, ends up in the dead money pool that is sitting there, has to be paid out. So every year it goes down because it's getting paid out unless you got other players that end up in that pool. That's the idea. You probably don't want very much dead money, I would assume.
Yeah, you could try to do whatever there's different ways to try to lessen that load, but every team's going to have dead money. There's no way to get away because every team's going to have injuries. Every team's going to have the player that they thought was going to be a good player that didn't pan out. And in order to replace him, he goes into the dead money. Now you got to go out and spend that money all over again. Spend the same $50 million all over again to find the player to take his place. It becomes a very complicated problem, and you have to try to defer as much of this as you can. It's going to eventually be paid, but defer it out as long as you can to take the pressure off the salary cap.
So I see, like when I looked at this chart, that the Patriots were at the top of $50 million in the salary cap out of the 279 for the year. And it went all the way down to the bottom where the Bills had 1.4 million. So they pretty much got everything spent. They're on the hook and they don't have anything. So if they have any injuries, you're just going to have to ride it out. That's just the nature of the beast. Now, let me ask you a question. If they trade a player, does that go with the team that buys them? Walk me through the implications of that, because I think in the Carson Wentz, I was following that when he was with the Eagles, and then his time as he went from team to team, and that whole contract that was there, I assume it could be renegotiated if the player's willing to do that, but maybe I'll let you explain it because I'm just speculating.
That all goes back into how the contract is structured. But just to make it real easy, if you trade a player, usually you're trading him and his contract to another team. And now there may be some structures in that contract, or in the trade you may have worked out a deal where we'll trade you this player for that player. We'll take his contract if you take the contract on this player, or this contract on our player doesn't have an extended contract. We'll take your player and give you this player on the trade, but you have to take 20% or 50% or half of the contract that's owed to the player as part of, in order to make the trade work. In other words, in order to trade the player with the entire contract, we trade the player and we keep 20% of the obligation of the contract in order to get the trade to work with the other team. So there's various ways. Again, it's very complicated, but you don't just, usually when you make a trade, the contract goes with the trade, but they can be structured depending on the two people involved and how the contract is structured and how it's paid out. There's various ways to do that. Again, structuring the contract is very important. All the years I did contracts, now the game has changed. I never guaranteed a contract, ever. Now you just don't get them without being guaranteed. Then you saw where the money has gone when the salary cap started to where it is now. So now most of the agents are, if you really can't do a contract without guaranteeing at least a percentage of the contract. That's true in baseball as well. Baseball salary cap operates the same way, but guaranteed contract was something I never ever did, and I never did a contract without an injury clause. So now some of them have injury clause, and everybody tries to fight for the injury clause because it really takes the blade out of your salary cap, as you might imagine. Boy, when the high priority players go down, it really hurts because they're really hard to replace because you don't have the money to replace. That's why that backup quarterback is important. A guy like Kurt Warner, when he came in and we signed him, and then he came in unknown, it really helped our salary cap. So you could see where we could spend a lot of money to go out and then draft and sign different and better players. But once, of course, when Kurt Warner got to become the all-pro and the great player he was, then he started taking up some money in that salary cap. But generally speaking, you're right about that. When you trade a player, you're trading the player with his contract, unless you negotiate it out. Again, goes back to negotiation.
So Charlie, you're saying the owner or whoever's the general manager, in your case, when you were at the Rams and you traded to one of your players, you have the power to negotiate with that other owner and keep part of it back, because you may not have a lot of dead space, but they may have a problem. And so that literally, by keeping track of where everybody's at, makes a difference in who you're pursuing and where your opportunity is, I assume.
It's made it big important. I always wanted to make sure I knew where the cap space was than anybody I was dealing with, because depending on the cap space, would pretty much structure in my mind what I could do and how I could structure that trade for a lot of people when they're trading players, they're trading out of the cap to gain cap space too. Got to remember that too. So you have to work both ends of the spectrum to make sure where you are. But if you have the positive end of that structure, you can structure your contract and your trade to really benefit your team. But a lot of teams try to trade out of a player so it can take the pressure off their salary cap. It's an interesting concept and how it all works. The people who are good at it can actually make the salary cap work for them and help them build their football team.
I read something maybe a year or two ago, Kirk Cousins, who just had a great career at the Vikings, and then they traded him, but they went on to say that he had probably made as much money as maybe any quarterback because you could always sign short-term contracts, so that allowed a company to pay him a lot. But then because he didn't try to tie into a long-term and get into the salary cap, he continued to be higher paid on an annual basis because he leveraged into it. But he took part of the risk himself, right? If he was hurt, then he's not going to have and if he doesn't perform, he's not going to have a good year, just like what happened with Sam Darnold at the Vikings, ending up out in Seattle. So those guys have a good year. Boy, now the money goes, right?
The money goes, and that's very, it's just a different philosophy. It all depends on how you structure it with your agent. And for people, your agent, some of them are very sophisticated, like an agent like Jack Mills out of Boulder, Colorado. He's an agent for Baker Mayfield, him and his son, Tom, and how they structured and how they handled his quarterbacks, even when he was a rookie coming with Cleveland, was very big advantage for him. And Cleveland, when they mess around with these quarterbacks and they've got such a problem in the organization by filtering out quarterbacks and filtering in quarterbacks, they've got so much money tied up in the quarterbacks that it really hurts their football team. And it really keeps you from building a quality team at other positions. So how you try that quarterback position, how you structure the quarterback contract is very important. And Kirk Cousins was very smart. He was going to make sure he got his, and he's going to make sure he's viable for another team when it comes to the end of his contract or his playing time. He's viable for another team that's willing to come in and pay him to be a backup quarterback, or maybe their starter, which has happened to him on different occasions. But structuring the quarterbacks contract is one of the key things as far as that position is concerned. But structuring all the positions is a very big key. You have to be disciplined. Again, you have to be disciplined where your money is going, how you spend your money. And when mama goes down to the supermarket, she has so much for the eggs, so much for the bread, so much for the potatoes. That's the same way with the football players. There's so much for each position.
So, Charlie, is there resentment against the quarterbacks on some of these teams because of, you take a Patrick Mahomes, who those guys they can just make a franchise, of course. But is there a little resentment towards the dollars the quarterbacks are getting?
You'd be amazed that there really isn't. The players seem to accept that some players are going to make more money than other players. And they all accept that the franchise quarterback is probably the key. I have never run into jealousy or resentment of a player that they perceive as being overpaid, but I haven't seen that. It has never been my experience. I'm sure it exists in some cases, but I've never experienced it. I've never witnessed it.
Charlie, we're going to go to the break, and we come back. I want to dig in a little bit further and get some stories that are related to some of the times you've had, like maybe with the Rams, and give some examples that would be related to how you dealt with that salary cap. Of course, Kurt Warner being an example. So, Charlie, you mentioned earlier in an earlier segment having Kurt Warner, who came in from working from the grocery store. Many of us have seen the movie. It's an amazing story of this guy and his faith and what he did, and ended up at the St. Louis Rams. And I was a Ram fan in those days, and still am, but now they went back to LA, so they've messed with me again. But anyway, so you have to say, are you with the city or are you with the helmet logo? I don't know what that is. But all that being said, let's talk about Kurt Warner and how that played into a salary cap to your benefit.
Well, the Kurt Warner story is great. I'll tell you a little story about Kurt. I asked him one time about all of his success, and all of the success he's had after all the disappointments when he first started was cut by the Green Bay Packers. And he said, and he looked me in the eye and he said, "That's because God is my coach." In other words, his faith carried him through. But Kurt was an interesting guy. I told you about the fact that my first high school coaching job, I had a kid by the name of Mike Coling. He was my quarterback, and he also coached on the staff where Kurt Warner played in northern Iowa. Interesting how these things unfold. But we brought Kurt. In those days, there was an NFL Europe, and we were always trying to figure out how to use NFL Europe to develop players. We brought Kurt and 2 or 3 other quarterbacks in to work them out, decide if we could, which one we would like to put in NFL Europe. Then the workout there was, and they questioned them. We really liked Kurt, so we decided to sign him to a contract and send him over to Amsterdam to play for Al Luganville in NFL Europe. Al Luganville had a big hand in helping us get this done. And they went over to NFL Europe, and of course, and that's probably not part of the movie, but he broke every record. And now that's no longer NFL Europe, so he still holds every record. And then I loaded my beautiful wife up on an airplane, and we flew to Amsterdam and signed him to an NFL contract, brought him back. And when he came back from NFL Europe, of course, we're just ready to go to training camp. And he goes into training camp and starts playing on the scout squad, and it's starting to catch everybody's attention because we can't handle him with the scouts. Yeah, on the scout team, he's completing all the passes and making all the quick reads and everything. And then when we get the injury to our quarterback, and then Dick Vermeil says Kurt Warner's proven that he can handle this, and all these, we were looking at a lot of different quarterbacks on the outside that guys had been played in the league and that were now available, and trades that were available. And Dick just said, "Hey, it didn't have anything to do with the salary cap," but Dick Vermeil just said, "We're going to play with Kurt Warner and we're going to win with Kurt Warner." And that what kicked him off. Now, having said that, having Kurt Warner as our quarterback, it saved us a lot of money in the salary cap. So now we could strengthen our player in our position in a lot of different ways. One of the ways when we made the trade with the Indianapolis Colts for Marshall Faulk, a Hall of Fame running back, we made the trade with the Indianapolis Colts, and they were trying to get a contract then with Marshall, and they were having difficulty. We traded, and we gave them a 4th-round draft pick for Marshall Faulk. Came in, and because we had the salary cap, we were able to structure his contract. And of course, Marshall Faulk went on to be one of the greatest running backs in history. But that's just a story of how using a player's contract that you have on the team will help you acquire a player that can improve your football team. And also, because we had to free the money in our salary cap, we were able to make the trade for Aeneas Williams, who was a great defensive back with the Arizona Cardinals, and he came into that football team. So because we were able to play Kurt at a certain salary cap, we were able to use that money to go out and expand our football team and improve our football team, which is a great thing. I'll keep it in mind that at some point, Kurt's going to get paid, and that's going to make a difference on your salary cap. But one of our highest paid players on the team was our left tackle. It's interesting how the salary cap dictates what you can and what you can't do, and how to develop a team around the salary cap. It's going to take a long time for Cleveland to dig themselves out of the hole they're in. And it's basically because of the salary cap and how the salary cap was managed.
And the thing I see when I looked at that chart, Cleveland's at about 78 million. So if you have a 279 million, almost a third of it is not even being able to be used. It's sitting there dead, whether Baker Mayfield or some of those other quarterbacks they brought in that just couldn't deliver. And I see the 49ers are the highest at over $100 million. And so that's interesting when you see these teams. And you mentioned the 49ers early on. Talk to us a little bit about that, what that means.
What happened, why you see the 49ers now are so high, is they were able to play with their quarterback at a rookie contract and trying to maintain. They're going to lose some players, but trying to maintain, they have a great running back. He's got to be paid. But what happened as soon as that quarterback contract was negotiated, a huge franchise quarterback contract that accelerated that money into so much money into the dead money field where you can't use it anymore because it's spent. It's like you're going and you spent the money, you can't respend it. So that caused a big problem for them. Now they have to manage how they structure. They have to play with players at the lower end of the salary cap to offset the upper end of the salary cap. So it's a balancing act. Again, it goes back. Remember when I told you when we first started talking about the salary structure, we have to know how much money we're going to spend on the offensive line, how much money we're spending on wide receivers, how much on the running backs, how much on the quarterbacks, and so on and so forth. You have to structure your salary cap so it doesn't become lopsided and it doesn't accelerate into the dead money. There's very little opportunity for the 49ers now to improve their team under this year's salary cap structure. if something happens, they're pretty much stuck with what they have and where they are.
So when you take this, you've been a general manager, how does the decision take place? I suppose it's different for every team. If you got a Jerry Jones, he's right in the middle of everything. If you got some teams, owners turn it over to the general manager or the head coach. How does that get managed, the personalities to make a successful franchise?
Okay, let me explain how this works with an NFL team. It's different than most teams, but NFL team is significant. What Jerry Jones and a lot of people don't realize, regardless of anything else, the entire program evolves around the head coach. Does it make a difference who the general manager is, who the owner is? The head coach is the focal point of whether you're going to succeed or not succeed. Your job as a general manager or personnel director, whatever, is to find the players that fit within that realm, within the comfort zone of that head coach. Bill Parcells used to have a statement. He says, if you're going to cook the meal, you ought to be able to go out and buy the groceries. In other words, you got to give me the players I need to make the meal. I can't make the meal if you don't let me have the right players and the right ingredients for the players. So everything evolves around that coach. It was easy with Dick Vermeil. The Dick Vermeil delegated responsibility, listened to the delegations, and made his decision. Therefore, some other head coaches didn't run with it. Now, that's the problem I see with Dallas Cowboys right now. It's not that the owner's not a good person, doesn't have good intent, but he's not qualified to be the one to structure the football team. When they had Jimmy Johnson, he had the structure right, and everything was made with Jimmy Johnson's decision through him. And as a result, they were winning Super Bowls. So you got to evolve your program around the football coach, what he wants, and how it evolves and how you get there. It was easy with Dick Vermeil. Every coach has a different personality, and I work with some great coaches. They all have a different personality. You have to identify that, and you have to understand what he needs to make the meal that you're looking for. In other words, to get you to the Super Bowl.
So when you take the time in the NFL and you look at what you would say would be some of the best programs, give us a couple examples.
Cincinnati is a great example of people who work all the time within the realm of the structure. In other words, they're not going to go out and destroy their salary cap or destroy their structure within their football team for any other reason other than to maintain discipline within the program. And they're going to have a good, solid football team all the time because they're going to stay within that realm. That's a well-organized and structured football team. Other teams, when you go hodgepodge here, dance up here, dance down there, you're never going to get to where you want to be. 49ers have been managed very well by their general manager and their head football coach. Unfortunate thing, of course, happened to them, but fortunate, first of all, with the quarterback, unfortunate that it accelerated. They still have a quality team, but the team has eaten up some of their quality players, and now they don't have any structure at this point to further develop their football team. But Dallas Cowboys right now is not a very good functional team as far as building a football program. Their intent is good, but they need a football man, a football guy to run their program and to manage it, just like Jimmy Johnson did when he was the head football coach.
Charlie, we're wrapping up this show with salary caps. When we come back on our next show next week, we're going to dig into winning the Super Bowl and what it takes to do that and how that organization that you played a part in building. I got a picture I'm going to bring and show you. I was watching the Super Bowl in San Diego when they lost to the New England Patriots, and I'm going to bring a picture that I have that I'll share with you. It was like 10 years after that because I was like a hardcore Rams fan. But I want to talk to winning the Super Bowl, what it took to did it, and what it feels like when that actually happened, because obviously that's very few people to do it. So thank you for joining us for episode 3.
Well, and thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to I'm going to tell you a very interesting story about New England Patriots where we played them and lost them in the Super Bowl. But it'll be very interesting to our fans as well.
We're going to want to talk about it next week. So, Charlie, thank you for joining us. We've been talking to Charlie on the Horn. I'm your host, Gary Emineth. Thanks for watching.